Hi everyone, welcome back to Parashat Pantry. We have a very special week, a very special Torah portion to explore this week. This week's Parashah is called Parashat Beshallach, and it is known as the Song of the Sea. For this is when the Israelites cross through the Sea of Reeds, escaping from slavery from Pharaoh in Egypt, and celebrate on the other side of the sea with Miriam, with song and dance. But I would actually like to focus on the end of the portion this week, which comes from chapter 16. It is the second month after the Israelites' departure from Egypt, and the Israelites start to grumble and complain against Moses because they are hungry. They say, "Why have you brought us out of Egypt just to suffer here in the wilderness?" God speaks to Moses and says, "I hear the Israelites, and I will rain down bread from the sky, and all of the people shall gather it, just as they need each day. And on the 6th day of the week, I will rain down 2 portions of bread, so they will have what they need for the 7th day when they're not to do any work." And that, of course, is for Shabbat. So God does just that. The sky opens up each day, raining down this powdery, floury-like substance that is known as manna. And it fulfills the people, and they are able to eat. So God sends just enough for the Israelites so that they will have enough, but it won't be too much. So the question I ask of us this week is, how is it do we know that we have enough? What does it feel like to be satiated? And I am going to guess that in so many ways we are satiated. Many of us have enough. And that is a good feeling. We must express our gratitude for it. And we also have to know when we have too much, for that is when we are to give to others. So I'm not sure if you know, this portion from the Torah is actually the reason that we eat challah on Shabbat. For we are to feel satiated and filled up. It's also the reason why we eat 2 portions of challah, or why we are supposed to set our table with 2 loaves of challah in honor of that double portion that God gives to the Israelites each Shabbat. Now, I know that challah is a wonderful thing to enjoy on Shabbat. Some of us do. Not all of us make our own challah, but I want to share a challah recipe that I have been making for almost 12 years, as long as I have been here at Temple Beth Elohim. And it is a recipe that Cantor Jodi Sufrin gave to me that I have changed and tweaked a little bit over the years to make it simple and easy. And I actually make it every single week. Takes only about a half an hour, except for the time that it has to rise. And so I hope by sharing this recipe it will be easy and accessible for you to do the same. So I gather all of my ingredients first, because once we get our hands sticky and messy with the dough, it's hard to go grab something else. So I am starting with just under a cup of hot tap water. You don't want it to be boiling. It should feel hot when you touch it, but it shouldn't feel like it's going to burn your hands. So I have about 7/8 of a cup, just under a cup. And into a small bowl, I am going to put my yeast. It's either 1 package of dry, active yeast, or it's 2 teaspoons and 1/4 teaspoon. So I'm going to put that into the bowl. And this is called proofing the yeast, prepping the yeast so that you get the most rise out of it and it starts to activate. And I am using fast acting yeast. It's very helpful. So I'm going to pour some of that water from the 7/8 cup until it gets liquidy. I'm going to stir this together and it's going to start to bubble. That's how I know that it is working. So I will get it all combined. I'm also going to smell it as well. So you can see the bubbles that are forming. We're just going to set that aside for a moment and let the yeast do its thing. So into my mixing bowl, I'm going to start to add all of my other ingredients. The only thing that we're going to hold back is I have 3 cups of flour total, but I'm only going to add them 1 cup at a time. I have a mixing bowl here, and you can do this all by hand, but it's definitely easier to throw everything in and let the machine do its work. So I'm going to start with a cup of flour. I like to use bread flour. I think it works really great. All-purpose flour works as well. So a cup of flour at a time. I'm just going to add 1 in here. Into my flour, I am going to add a 1/4 cup of sugar. Now you can use any sweetener. I used to use a 1/4 cup of honey, which definitely makes the dough more moist, but I've come to really like the way that the sugar is. So 1/4 cup of sugar, and I'm going to add a few teaspoons of salt. I should say that the yeast really thrives on the sugar, so to add a little bit of sugar while the yeast is proofing is really helpful as well. So once I have my dry ingredients in, I'm going to add in my yeast, my proofed yeast mixture with the rest of the water. And then I'm going to add my oil and my eggs. You can use any kind of fat or oil. 1/4 cup of melted butter makes it very rich and creamy. I'm just using a simple vegetable oil. You can use avocado oil, but just note that whatever kind of oil you add is going to give it a little bit of taste and flavor. So I keep it simple. And 2 eggs. So those are the simple ingredients now all in my mixer. So if you have a hand mixer, you can use that, or you can use a whisk. I'm going to let the KitchenAid do its thing, and I'm going to beat on medium until it is fully combined and also starts to bubble. So I'm going to scrape down the edges. The flour tends to stick to the bottom. It's nice and smooth, and the bubbles are starting to form. So we'll let it beat for another minute. So you can see how it is nice and smooth and a little bit bubbly. Now, all we have to do is just add the rest of the flour, 1 cup at a time. If you're a little unsure, I would just add a 1/2 cup at a time. Typically, it takes 3 cups total until the dough starts to form a ball. We don't want it to be too sticky, so I'm going to show you what it should look like once we have the right amount of flour. The other thing I'm going to do is switch to my paddle attachment. If you're doing this by hand, this would be where you start to mix with a wooden spoon, because the dough is going to get a little bit more tough. Low speed. So that's combined, so I'm going to scrape down the edges. You can see that it's starting to get a little bit thick and lumpy. from this point on, it's not going to be smooth again until we take it out and knead it. We just want to make sure that it's the right consistency. You can see though it's really sticky. So we have about 1 more cup of flour to go, and I'm going to scrape down this attachment because I'm going to add a different attachment when we add our final cup of flour, and that is the kneading hook, the dough hook. If you're doing this by hand, just stick with the wooden spoon until you can't do any more. So, 1 more cup of flour. I'm just going to add a little bit at a time because the consistency is really important to get here. Low speed again. Starting to form a ball. Just going to add a little bit more flour because I'm starting to see that ball, but I don't want it to be sticky. Scraping down the edges again. And this is looking really good. So I'm going to dump this out onto my floured surface in front of me and start to work the dough. And I can always add more flour at that point, but that's when I'm going to get the feel of how stretchy and sticky it is and if it's come together nicely. So I'm going to do one thing before I touch the dough, which is to get a clean bowl and cover the bottom of it with oil, because once I'm done kneading this, I'm going to put it in that bowl and my hands are going to be really sticky. So I'm going to set that aside and flour my surface. See what the dough looks like. So you can see it's made a nice ball. And I am going to start to knead and work the dough. My hands are still a little sticky. So you can see that I have a ball and I'm going to fold it in half and with my palm push it together. Turn it, fold it, and push it. I think this is a really meditative process. So it always feels so comforting and restful to do this as we get ready for Shabbat. So it's good to knead for several minutes. What you're doing is introducing air into the dough, which the yeast needs to keep rising. And I'm going to be able to feel here what the dough needs. So as I am kneading, it's getting a little sticky, so I just added more flour. As I knead, the dough is going to become more elastic and smooth. Okay, so now I have a beautiful ball of dough, and I am going to put that inside of my greased bowl, and I'm going to spray the top of it with oil. This helps to ensure that the dough does not dry out too much or stick to whatever it is that you put on top of it. And I'm going to put a tea towel on top to let a little bit of air get in, and I'm going to place this in a warm place. If you can find something that's around 80 degrees, that's perfect. That might mean turning your oven on and then turning it off and placing it on top of the oven because it'll be a little bit warmer. In the summer, I like to put it outside, but we're gonna let it be for about an hour and a half, and we'll see how much it's risen, and then all we have to do is braid it and put it in the oven. So I let this dough sit out actually for a few hours, so you can see that it really puffed up in the bowl. I'm going to take it out and put it on the counter that I have added some more flour to, and I'm going to have to, there's Ella,
Can I help?
push it down. You can see how much air is in this dough. So we're just going to pound it down.
I'm gonna roll my sleeves up.
Yep, that's it. So I'm actually going to cut this dough in half because you may remember that it is our goal to have 2 loaves. So you want to cut the dough. It's actually better to cut it versus tearing it. And this will make 1 nice sized big challah or 2 small ones. So I'm going to set this one aside.
Why are we making small ones
today? We're making 2 small ones today. So I'm going to cut this into 4. Cut it in half. Cut it in half again because I like to do a really easy 4-stranded braid. I'm going to show you how to do that. So once I have 4 balls of dough, I'm going to make each ball into a snake, just like you used to like to do with Play-Doh. And if you cut the dough evenly, each one will be about the same size. So I'm going to make, we don't want to stretch it or pull it too thin because I like my challah to be nice and squishy, Ella said.
I like
doughy. So I'm just going to lay them out next to each other. I have 4 equal dough logs, and I'm going to lay these 3 next to each other. And the 4th one, I'm going to weave over, under, over.
It's like you're making like an H.
Yeah.
See, it looks like an H.
So I'm making 2 very small challah loaves here, but if I'm using this to make 1, it's a lot easier to do because these would be a lot bigger. Yeah. Let me just show you how I braid these, and we'll have 2 small challah dough. So I have 3 strands at the top, and I'm just going to make a standard braid, crossing over from each side. So I have a braid at the top, and I'm going to do a braid at the bottom. And I'm going to pinch the ends together. And then I have 2 on the outside that are left, and I'm going to bring 1 up to the side and tuck it under, and 1 on the bottom and tuck it under. So then I have a nice little challah loaf that I'm going to put on my pan. So we're just going to repeat the process with the other ball of dough, cutting it in half, cutting it in 4s, rolling them out, and braiding. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat. I have 2 of the braided challah doughs on my baking sheet that I have put on a silicone mat. If you don't have a silicone mat, just make sure that the baking sheet is greased. So you can braid the challah however you want. The dough is really forgiving, and even if it loses its shape in the oven, it's going to be delicious. So don't worry too much about how it looks. The last thing I'm going to do is I separated an egg to put the egg yolk in a little jar with a few tablespoons of maple syrup, and Ella is back because this is her favorite part. I'm just going to mix the egg yolk and the maple syrup together, and then Ella is going to spread these over both of the challah painting. She's going to spread it over the challah. Make sure to cover all sides of the challah. And this makes sure the challah doesn't dry out, but it also gives it a really nice
how does this make it
crusty
not
shine.
dry out?
Kind of seals the top of it. And if you push the dough together and squeeze it under, it tends to stick.
And it also kind of makes it sweet because you have maple syrup in it. Okay, 2 little challah done.
And finally, this is where you can add any kind of seasoning.
Can I put
We are a fan of everything bagel seasoning.
a little bit on this? There, perfect.
These are going to go into the oven, 350 degrees, for, I do 30 minutes for 1 loaf, but 2 small ones, I'm going to keep an eye on it at 25 minutes. So let's see how they come out. And while they cook, I'm going to say goodbye and wish you a Shabbat Shalom, a happy Tu B'Shvat, as well as a week where you remember to express your gratitude for everything that you have that satiates you. Shabbat Shalom.
לעסוק בדברי תורה, לעסוק בדברי